Hi, everybody. Happy Monday. All right. Today, I'm just going to chat with you guys. This is not a health and fitness thing at all. So if that's what you're looking for, I'm so sorry. That is not it today. We are going to have a conversation about relationships today. Relationships and marriage and Christianity and the gospel and all that. So, and then I am just getting ready for the day so you guys can chat with me. Let me just make sure my volume's up. Oh, better. Okay, I hope you guys can hear me now. So I was just saying that we're going to talk about submission. Ooh, dirty word. Today. And then I'm getting ready to, I'm going to go just run some errands. So that's what I'm doing today. All right. So the title of this video is Submission is Not for You. And the reason why I titled it this way is because for some reason I am in a submission algorithm on YouTube. I am on that side of the, I don't know how that happened. I must have clicked on a video, but you know how the algorithm does that. They like put you in an algorithm and then you're stuck. So I'm in submission algorithm. And what is so funny to me is that submission is a Christian biblical concept. And a lot of y'all talking about submission are self-proclaiming atheist or anti-Christian or, Jesus is the white man's religion. So you're pulling from a concept that's really not yours and trying to manipulate it to make it work for you. But if you're going to use submission, which is God's idea, which is a Christian ideal, then you have to fall into the realm that Christianity calls men to be. And women, for example, but a lot of men are talking about this. They're like, she's not submissive, and I'm like, perhaps, my friend, it's because you don't have anything to submit to. So we're going to talk about it. So yes, and for those of you who are like, she don't know what she's about, she ain't married. There we go. And even if I wasn't, this conversation would still be valid. A lot of people on the internet are going around talking about submission, and they do not even believe in the biblical roles of men and women. And because submission is God's idea, you have to then adhere to the biblical roles of men and women. And I'm going to talk about a few of those roles for men, and then I'm going to talk about them for women. So the first thing is that the Bible calls men to be leaders of the home. And he calls men to be workers and providers in the home. And a lot of men today don't actually they demonize women who want to stay at home, and they call them gold diggers. And they demonize women who are saying, hey, if you want submission, you need to do your part as well. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's entirely biblical. It would be so unwise and so foolish of me to submit, or even let's just, before we even talk about submission, date or marry a man who did not have the biblical requirements of marriage. That would be foolish. But a lot of these men do not have it, and they're talking about submission, but they don't have what the Bible would require of a man in the first place. The Bible calls you to be a follower of Christ, that calls you to be submitted to the Lord. A lot of these men are not submitted to anybody. They talk about women with disrespect. They don't value her as a daughter of the king in general, women in general. They don't respect women. They don't respect what God has designed for women to be. They don't respect women's innate value, right? The Bible says he who finds a wife finds a good thing. They don't say he who finds a wife who works and does XYZ. He who finds a wife finds a good thing. That means that women inherently have value, right? They have inherent value. That doesn't mean, don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that you don't need to have qualities too, because I'm going to talk about those qualities as well. But the position of, oh, I'm good, submission. It's like, okay, well, if you want someone to submit, you have to be worth submitting to. And the Bible has very specific qualifications for what you should be doing in order for someone to submit, because submission is God's idea. It is not a worldly ideal. So you don't get to just make up what it means for someone to submit to you and why they should submit to you. And what I'm seeing is a lot of these men, like, they'll say things like, oh, well, she needs to have her own and she needs to work. She needs to be willing to support, like help support me. That's not a biblical ideal. Like in God's design, ideally, the woman is not the provider. She's not a provider, but we, and I understand that we live in a different world. I work, you guys, I work, I run my own business. I work, but I'm not providing, right? And a lot of these men who are talking about submission do not want to provide. They do not want to be sole providers, and they can't. They cannot, because they have not made it for themselves to where they can be sole providers. And granted, we're living in a strange world because of the economy that we live in the United States. So to caveat that, what I would say is, if a man cannot pay his own bills, that's part of providing. That's part of God's design for submission, is marrying someone who can actually take care of themselves. And then, of course, ideally you. I live in California. I know it's really hard for people to take care of, for a man to have a single income home. I understand that. But the reality is, if you need a roommate to pay your bills, you are not worth submitting to. That is a biblical tenet. So if you're going to use submission, we have to stay on track with what God requires of men who are to be submitted to. The other thing I see is a lot of men who are talking about submission, like I said, do not respect women. And they're yelling at the women, they're screaming at women, they're not treating them as the weaker vessel. The Bible says not to stir women, to respect women, not to stir them to anger, to treat them as daughters of the king. Okay, that's not what self-controlled men do. Okay, in Titus, the Bible outlines how men are supposed to act: self-controlled, sober-minded. These men are out here on podcasts drinking and acting a fool, and then trying to say something about submission. You're not worth submitting to. You're all kinds of out of order, and then you're trying to use the word of God to tell people how to behave. That's wrong. You don't get to do that. You don't get to do a la carte selection from the Bible and not, like, submission does not happen without the parameters of a male and female playing their role, right? If you want her to play the role of submissive wife, then you play the role of provider husband. It's super simple, actually. So this idea that, oh, I'm going to just, I want you to provide for me. Also, I want you to go with me 50-50 in a relationship, and then expect you to act in servitude is really weird to me. That is just so bizarre. And again, I work. I'm not like, women shouldn't work. They should never be outside the home. But I'm saying, on a surface level, if your job is to be a man and a provider and a leader of the household, and you want submission, then you have to be completely okay with her potentially not working. And then on top of that, you have to be the kind of man that a woman is worth submitting to. Now, let's get into that, because that's even more important than the financial conversation. Before I got married, my brother and I were having a conversation, and he was like, half these men I would never want you to date because they're just not emotionally stable. And they're not ready. Like, a lot of these men actually need women in order to sustain their life. He was like, these men they don't respect women. They just see them as something to control. And a lot of these podcasts, you guys, he's right. He's like, even these men who are so-called Christians, they don't actually respect or value, like, they don't even know what a woman actually brings to the table as a woman, like, just in her being, in her presence, what her presence does for men. He was like, these men are jacked up. They don't actually know. A lot of these men didn't have examples of like a mother and a father, and didn't have examples of, an example of a woman even supporting and loving and working with and cooperating with a man. So my brother was like, I wouldn't want you to date any of these men I know, because they don't even know what that would begin to look like, because they've never seen it. So in their minds, a lot of these men are on this oppressor control situation where they're not actually appreciating women. They just want to control them. And that's what I see a lot of on the internet, is this idea, this desire to control women and to have control over something without being the kind of man that a woman trusts to control. Because there can't be two kings in a house, right? Like, I'm a firm believer of that. I don't want to be. Listen, I am so glad there are a lot of things that are no longer in my hands. Let me tell y'all, I am so grateful and so thankful for that. But I would not marry a man who I couldn't trust. And a lot of these men are not trustworthy. They haven't proven themselves to be men of God. They haven't proven themselves to be men who can be trusted with making good decisions. And they're asking women to submit to them. That's stupid. That is so dumb. Women and women should not be doing that. And I think this is weird. Another weird aspect of this conversation is like, I want you to be a girlfriend, which is not even biblical. It's not a biblical thing. Again, we talk about submission. Girlfriends are not biblical. I want you to be a girlfriend. I want you to submit to me. Absolutely. Of that. Not everybody is worthy of that. And a lot of men think they're worthy of that because they're men. No. Okay. So submission is God's idea. Submission is God's plan. And if you are someone who cannot do the basics of what God asks of men and women, then you can't talk about this submission conversation. The submission conversation is not for you. And just on a biological level, you guys, there in no way, in no animal species, nothing in the world, nowhere does a woman accept a mate who cannot do the basics, right? Who cannot provide the basics: food, shelter, water, clothing. That's not even seen in the animal kingdom, right? But we want to ask these women out here to do that. And what I'm noticing is a lot of men are bitter about women. They're bitter. They're angry at women for being successful. And that's not a trait of a godly man. A godly man would be like, I understand that you've had to work because that's the society that we live in. And I can't wait to support you so that you can, you don't have to work. Right? And just having a general understanding of a women's biology, right? Women's biology is, we would prefer not to. Most women would prefer not to work. Most women would prefer to do something in the home. Most women would prefer, if they could. A lot of women would prefer to have something that is not stressful, have a job that doesn't where they're not in control of all the finances. Most women want that. The problem is that a lot of men do not want that for women. They're pretending like they do, but they don't really want that for women, because that would require that men step their game up. And a lot of men don't want to step their game up. They want to have their cake and eat it too, which is, you submit to me and I benefit from you working, and I benefit from you not having any leadership skills, and then trying to force you to submit to me when I haven't demonstrated that I'm worth someone to submitting to. And this is also, I'm gonna just call it like it is, it's on women for making it acceptable to these men that they don't require anything of them before they submit. I absolutely require something before I submit to you. You need to be following God. You need to have some emotional clarity, be emotionally well. You need to respect women. You need to have a good idea of what value a woman has outside of her body, outside of her being something you can control. And then we can talk about submission. We can talk about submission once you've done those things. Until then, that's not a conversation that you need to be having with anybody, that anyone needs to be having, because this, again, submission is God's idea. It's not man's idea. So you don't get to just say, submit to me, even though I've been out here sleeping around with a ton of women, but I want you to have these standards. Submit to me, but I want you to also go 50-50 with me on all these bills because I can't take care of myself. Submit to me, but I want to disrespect you and call you all kinds of things and expect sex from you in a first date. Absolutely not. That's not even biblical. And this is why this conversation is so weird to me, because I'm like, as a Christian, I understand the parameters of submission. The parameters of submission are quite stringent for men. If a man cannot work and provide for his household, he's worse than an unbeliever. That's what Timothy says. What are we doing? What are we doing? Let's see how my face looks. You guys can't really see because it's decent. This is not the best job I've done. But anyway, that's just my little chat on submission, and that it's not, you know, we gotta stop having these conversations if we're not gonna follow through on all the guidelines, because in an ideal situation, men would be able to provide for women fully, and we don't live in that world. So submission is going to look differently than what it used to look like. And I think that's a conversation for another day. But a lot of men want to just go back to the 1920s, and that's not reality. So that means submission has to look differently. That means leadership has to look differently. You can't just take women and be like, shut up and sit down, and you know what I say goes. That's weird, that's abusive, and that's not biblical. Now, and I think this is a blessing actually, that because women can work, men and women have to do a greater deal of self-work and self-development to understand how to do submission and do leadership in an environment where both people are working and both people are contributing, because submission and leadership was very easily like mocked, I would say, when women didn't have to work. You could just pretend, right? Because it's like, I'm at home, I'm making sourdough bread, but now that women can work and a lot of women have to work, what does that actually look like? How do I gain the respect of a woman? Because that women will have a hard time submitting to a man that they cannot respect. And the question is, how do I demonstrate respect? How do I earn the respect of women? By having good character, by demonstrating good values, by being an ambitious, hard worker, by not disrespecting women. Unfortunately, a lot of people cannot do that. They can't do that these days. They're in the blame game. They're mad at women. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. All right, you guys, that's it. I gotta make a phone call, but I just want to hop on here and talk about submission. Hey, Kristen, good to see you again. Hope you're well. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Toodles. Let's see.